Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Monday the 5th of February. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined this evening by Maureen Watt. Maureen, welcome to the show once again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian, and good evening. It's good to be with you again.
And just to remind viewers, Maureen, you were previously an SNP MSP and former Minister for Mental Health in the Scottish Government, but now retired, which means that we get to enjoy more of your thoughts and observations here on Broadcasting Scotland. So thank you for that. I'll start again with our routine update of the Ukraine situation, day 712. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he was considering replacing several senior officials, and not just in the military. It comes amid speculation that the president is about to dismiss the commander of Ukraine's military, Valery Zaluzhnyi. He said, in quotes, "It is a question of the people who are to lead Ukraine," Zelensky told Italian TV when asked about Zaluzhnyi. "A reset is necessary. I am talking about the replacement of a number of state leaders," Zelensky said. His comments came after Zelensky made a trip to Ukrainian troops on the southeastern front line to hand out medals. Zelensky used the visit to announce a new mayor of the frontline Zaporizhzhia region, Ivan Fedorov. Fedorov was once abducted by Russia and was previously mayor of the now temporarily occupied Melitopol since December 2020. The Netherlands Ministry of Defence is readying 6 additional F-16 fighter aircraft for delivery to Ukraine, Kajsa Ollongren, the Dutch Defence Minister, announced. Russia launched an attack against the southern city of Kherson on Monday, killing at least 4 residents and injuring 1 other person, Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko said. Hungary's ruling party reportedly boycotted a parliamentary session on Sweden's NATO membership, postponing a vote by the last alliance member to approve the expansion of the defensive alliance. More than 24 people, mostly journalists, were detained on Saturday at a protest in central Moscow, where wives and other relatives of Russian servicemen mobilized to fight in Ukraine called for their return, according to a Reuters witness and independent Russian news reports. Belgium is asking G7 countries to consider using €260 billion in seized Russian assets held by the West as collateral for loans to Ukraine, according to a report in the Financial Times. This would avoid questions around the legality of seizing the assets outright, as has also been considered by Ukraine's allies, according to the paper. US senators are racing to release a highly anticipated bill that pairs border enforcement policy with wartime aid for Ukraine, Israel and other... I'm going to read that again. So the bill would pair border enforcement policy with wartime aid for Ukraine, Israel and other US allies. The proposal is the best chance for President Biden to resupply Ukraine with wartime aid. The Senate was expected this week to hold a key test vote on the legislation, but it has already run into a wall of opposition from Conservatives. Russia said 28 people, including 1 child, have died in Saturday's shelling of a bakery in the eastern Ukrainian city of Lysychansk, which is under Russian occupation. A further 10 people were rescued from under the rubble by emergency services, according to officials. So, Maureen, that was today's update. Was there anything there that you'd like to elaborate upon?
I think what caught my attention, Brian, was the suggestion that seized assets of Russian oligarchs should be used to fund Ukraine in terms of funding, weapons and things like that. And I think that would go down very well with people in the West, because what happens to them otherwise? I'm not really very sure. Do they just go into, let's say they were seized in London and there's lots of property and assets of Russian oligarchs in London. Would it just go into the coffers of the British Treasury or what? So I think that's something that should be explored further.
Thank you, Maureen. Yeah, I think Anthony Salamoni picked that out on Sunday as well as a similar related item. So if anybody's interested in hearing what he had to say, then I would recommend that you go back and watch the full Scottish from yesterday. I'll move on to our latest from Israel and Gaza. At least 27,478 Palestinians have been killed and 66,835 have been wounded by Israeli military action in Gaza since the 7th of October, the Gaza Health Ministry said today. Spain will send the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, the UNRWA, an additional €3.5 million in aid, Foreign Minister Jose Manuel Alvarez told lawmakers today. The agency has warned of a significant funding shortfall after several large donors suspended funding after Israel accused 12 UNRWA employees of participating in the 7th of October Hamas attack inside southern Israel. The Palestine Red Crescent Society has reported on social media that Israeli forces have detained the general manager and the administrative director of the Al Amal hospital in Khan Yunis. A 14-year-old Palestinian child was shot dead by Israeli security forces near occupied East Jerusalem after what they claimed was an attempted stabbing attack. In its latest operational update, the Israeli military claims it has killed dozens of terrorists in the central and northern Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. Palestinian news agency Wafa reports that Israeli bombardment continues in Khan Yunis. The large areas east of the city of Deir al-Balah are also being targeted. At least 20 Palestinians were killed over the weekend in Israeli strikes on Rafah, the city previously designated a safe zone by the Israeli military and to where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians had fled, according to the UN humanitarian agency, the OCHA. 6 allied Kurdish fighters were killed late Sunday by a drone attack on a base that also houses US troops in eastern Syria in the first significant attack in Syria or Iraq since the US launched strikes over the weekend against Iran-backed militias. The US-backed Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF, said today the attack hit a training ground at Al Omar base in Syria's eastern province of Deir el-Zur, where the force's commando units are trained. No casualties were reported among US troops. Islamic resistance in Iraq has claimed responsibility. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrives in Saudi Arabia on his 5th visit to the region since October. He will visit Israel as well as Egypt and Qatar. Speaking today after meeting in Washington with Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, Blinken said there was real hope for success of a good, strong ceasefire proposal. Jake Sullivan, President Biden's national security advisor, said Blinken would press Israel to allow more food, water, medicine and shelter into Gaza, which has been left in rubble by nearly 4 months of bombardment. Russia summoned Israel's ambassador in Moscow over comments Simon Halperin made in an interview. Simona Halperin had made in an interview. She had criticised Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov for playing down the importance of the Holocaust and said Russia was being too friendly with Hamas. Again, Maureen, just the same question. Was there anything there that you'd like to pick out?
Well, I think it's clear that a lot of work is going on in the background that we're not hearing about to try and broker a ceasefire and a longer lasting peace between Israel. I suspect that the stumbling block will be Israel, who, in my view, are just hell-bent on obliterating Gaza and any consideration of the population there whatsoever. So the fact that Antony Blinken is coming back yet again, I think, perhaps he is the only one that can actually try and get Israel to move on this. But clearly, in the Middle East itself, there is a lot of negotiating going on, and it would seem that the Qataris are at the forefront of this, which is good because it should be the middling their own disputes, in my view.
Thank you, Maureen. I suspect you're probably right that there is a lot going on that we're not hearing about in the news. But I'll move on to our next item. The SNP has reported Rishi Sunak over a potential breach of the ministerial code by accepting a £1,000 bet that he will ship vulnerable refugees to Rwanda before the next election. In a letter to the Independent Advisers on Ministers' Interests, Sir Laurie Magnus, CBE, and Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, calling for an investigation, Kirsty Blackman said that it is shameful and grotesque that Rishi Sunak, one of the richest men in the UK, is betting money on whether he can ship vulnerable refugees abroad in time for the election. The SNP's Cabinet Office spokesperson added that it appears to be a clear breach of the ministerial code and the Nolan principles of public life, and the bet falls below the high standards people should expect of those in public life, not least the most powerful person in Westminster. End quote. Commenting the SNP's Cabinet Office spokesperson, Kirsty Blackman MP, said, "Placing a bet on the lives of vulnerable refugees fleeing war and persecution is grotesque, callous and downright cruel, and shows just how out of touch Westminster is with the values of people in Scotland. It's particularly shameful that Rishi Sunak, one of the richest men in the UK, thinks it's appropriate to accept a £1,000 wager and will remind ordinary working families that near-billionaire Sunak doesn't have a clue what life is like for the rest of us in a cost of living crisis. It also appears to be a clear breach of the ministerial code," she went on to say, "and the high standards that people should expect of those in public life, not least the most powerful person in Westminster. For Scotland, it shows Westminster has sunk to a new low, and we would be better off escaping broken Brexit Britain and determining our own asylum policy with independence." So, Maureen, the Ministerial Code is a document that sets out rules and standards for government ministers in the United Kingdom. There's separate codes for the conduct of ministers in the devolved governments. It seems to me, I was having a look at them, it seems that he has broken at least one of them. The very first one, which I'm just looking for, it's to behave in a way that upholds the highest standards of propriety. But as a few people have mentioned, I don't know if you've seen the clip, he didn't actually use the phrase, or he didn't actually say, "Okay, you're on, Piers," but he did shake hands, so it's a bit confusing as to whether he did actually accept the bet. But would it surprise you to know that the SNP have gone further than Labour? Labour have only said that that he's out of touch, rather than call for a to say that he's breached the.
Sorry, what did you say Labour said?
Labour simply said that the Prime Minister was out of touch. I'm looking through my notes for the. They didn't actually call for him to. It's Jonathan Ashworth said. Sorry, on you go.
I think Kirsty's right to call him out on this, because I cannot imagine how anybody else can see it other than a completely crass even remark on a very, very serious subject, whether he took the bet or not. I mean, if he shakes hands with Piers Morgan, I would have thought that was an indication that you were on with the whether Piers Morgan was trying to trap him or not. I don't know. You know, comes on the back of Rishi Sunak laughing at a woman who questioned him on the NHS when he was out on an event somewhere. So he is clearly, I don't know, he clearly just doesn't get how seriously affected people are by the actions of this Tory government. And, you know, they talk about gaffes during election campaigns, and we know how Gordon Brown had a serious gaffe, and Neil Kinnock before him. So if this is how Rishi Sunak is going to behave during um, is behaving now, goodness knows what sort of gaffes he will leave himself open to during an election campaign. And, his own backbenchers must be gritting their teeth at his behaviour sometimes.
Yeah, I was wondering why maybe his advisors in the room didn't try to stop the interview or something like that. It is an interesting clip. He kind of comes across again as kind of an odd fellow. Instead of saying, "Okay, you're on, Piers, I accept the bet," and shaking hands, which is what most people would probably do, he just kept saying, "I want to get the people on the planes." He said it 3 times in quick succession. So it just can't. Do you think? Do you agree with what a lot of people have been saying? Is that he's just not very good at politics?
Well, remember before him, Suella Braverman said that she couldn't wait, or what did she say? I can't remember exactly. She couldn't wait to see the planes to Rwanda take off. So clearly, this is one of their 5 pledges, isn't it? So they're desperate to see it happen. Never mind the terrible situation it's putting those who are on the list to go in. And it's just the whole inhumanity of it that they don't seem to be able to see. The whole that bill that was rushed through to say that Rwanda was safe, even although in the eyes of the international community, it's not that safe. So this whole episode, I'm sure, will come up as an election issue, and if the planes haven't taken off by then, I think that it will be a serious dent to the credibility, another serious dent to the credibility of the Tories.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the word crass. It's like the fact that it's £1,000 is chicken feed to Keir Starmer, but during a cost of living crisis, and to be making a bet over, Sunak, it's going to be chicken feed to him. But, Maureen, the viewers at home are sitting watching silence when we've got a voice in our ear. Do you want to maybe respond to what we were hearing?
Well, I wouldn't make too much of this, to be honest. The
About
betting
Labour.
part of it, I think the betting part takes away from the seriousness of the situation. And well, Labour are on a sticky wicket, and increasingly on a sticky wicket. I think that they are so desperate to get into power that they're prepared to go into an election on more or less the same ground as the Tories. And I cannot for the life of me understand this because, in my view, if the Labour Party tacked to the left, I am sure they would get more votes than just saying they're softer Tories or red Tories rather than blue Tories. I just don't get it. And it'll be interesting to see what happens during an election campaign. I mean, I think over the weekend they said that they were trying to remove anything from their manifesto that the Tories could have a go at them for, so include and I think we'll be discussing that later on. But it just seems ridiculous that they think they can win an election just being a bit different from the Tories, when the whole idea of an opposition party is to offer something completely different and a whole new way, in my view, of running the economy. And they're just not prepared to do that. Don't frighten the horses at any stage between now and a general election day.
Yeah, and we need to move on, but it's worth mentioning that it's not the first time that Sunak's been accused of breaching the ministerial code. Chris Bryant in 2021 accused him of it when Sunak made Parliament go into recess to avoid PMQs. But we have time's against us, so I'll move on to the next item. The UK government has played down Sinn Féin's calls for Irish unity and said Northern Ireland's new devolved government should restore stability and faith in the region. Rishi Sunak said Northern Ireland's place in the UK was protected and urged the Stormont executive, led by Michelle O'Neill, the first nationalist First Minister, to focus on bread and butter issues, not redrawing the border. It is not constitutional change, it is delivering on the day-to-day things that matter to people, he said on Monday after meeting executive ministers, party leaders and Ireland's Taoiseach Leo Varadkar at Stormont. After meeting Sunak, Sinn Féin's leader alluded to the party's push for a referendum on a united Ireland within 10 years. Mary Lou MacDonald said, "Change is all around and must be managed." Last week she said Irish unity was within touching distance. Under the Good Friday Agreement, the Secretary of State should call a referendum if a majority in Northern Ireland appears to favour unification. The four parties that comprise the executive, Sinn Féin, the DUP, Alliance and the Ulster Unionists, presented a united front in lobbying for funding from London in addition to a £3.3 billion package that is already on the table. Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris said the £3.3 billion package was ample for the time being and that politics was about making choices. He said, "I believe the new set of ministers are completely capable of running their public finances perfectly well with the fair and generous funding package we have given them." Sunak said that what people want is a government delivering on the priorities that matter to them when he was asked about Northern Ireland. I expect here he meant Westminster being the parliament that's to deliver. Shouldn't he be referring to the Assembly in Stormont? And if he is, that Sinn Féin won the most votes back in 2022. So doesn't that mean that people do want a reunited Ireland as a priority, counter to what Sunak tells them?
Where have we heard this before, that devolved governments should concentrate on the bread and butter issues? It'll be interesting to see how Rishi Sunak, in the dying days of his government, deals with two parts of the United Kingdom who are wanting change in their relationship with Westminster. And we'll see how he deals with one compared to the other. But it is clear that Sinn Féin stood on a manifesto of holding a referendum within the next 10 years. And they are the majority party in the Assembly in Northern Ireland. And I'm sure that Michelle O'Neill will be getting on with the terrible problems that there are because they haven't had a functioning government in the years past. So there's lots to do on the domestic front, but the fact that this is also part of their manifesto is not something that they can ignore. So, as I say, it'll be interesting to see, how a referendum is achieved in Northern Ireland, and obviously what the outcome will be. And I think it will have great repercussions for our situation in Scotland, where the majority have voted for a referendum and we're not getting one. Interesting times.
Yes, it was Theresa May's phrase, wasn't it, when she told Scotland that now is not the time and to be getting on with the day job. So the power sharing between Michelle O'Neill, the First Minister, and whoever the Deputy First Minister is going to be, although there's a First Minister and a Deputy, they're equal footing and they're going to, any decisions made are going to have to be agreed by both. How do you think that's going to work out?
Well, I think obviously there's precedence for this because Ian Paisley worked very well with Martin McGuinness in the past. Now that the roles are reversed, it'll be interesting to see. I think, from what you saw on the telly earlier on today, they're kind of the women are still kind of feeling their way around each other. But I'm sure they will get on to work for the best interests of the people of Northern Ireland. And it is a slightly different relationship than we would expect. They are equal. So I really, really hope that they don't fall out. Clearly on the constitutional issue, they might, but I really hope that they can get ahead with the other issues. And I think it's important that there are two women there and not the kind of old unionists and grey men in grey suits that typifies Ulster unionists. And I'm hopeful and I really do hope that it works and they can motor ahead in Northern Ireland.
Because it's 2 years since, the Assembly's been shut for 2 years at Stormont. Can you imagine if that was the case in the Holyrood and nothing was being done, and then all of a sudden you've got a First Minister and a Deputy First Minister from opposing sides, and they've got to get on and I'd imagine agree a huge amount of things that have been lying untouched for 2 years now.
Yeah, and I mean, surely they can agree on, how to take the health service in Northern Ireland forward. First of all, making sure that the staff there, who haven't had a pay rise for 2 years, can get a decent pay rise because they're losing staff hand over fist at the moment. But also that people in Northern Ireland must be very mindful of the fact that, the people in the south are much wealthier than they are. GDP per head in Ireland in ERA is massive compared to the rest of the UK. So there'll be great expectations, I think, of the Northern Ireland Assembly being reconvened, and it'll be interesting to see whether they can be met. And of course, there is, I think, at some point this year, an election in the south, and it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of that is, whether Sinn Féin, increase their representation in the Dáil.
Thank you, Maureen. Yeah, interesting times ahead as well. So the next item is Stephen Flynn MP has warmly welcomed the return of the Stormont Assembly and Executive as a positive step forward for all the people of Northern Ireland. The SNP Westminster leader added that a restored government in Northern Ireland, which will operate with the full economic benefits of access to the European single market, raises a critical choice ahead of the next general election. He said the question naturally arises as to why, 12 miles across the Irish Sea, businesses in Scotland are being denied the same deal and denied the same benefits. Only this week, Brexit red tape has meant fruit and vegetable imports will face a price hike of £200 million as a result of import controls. Mr Flynn challenged Sir Keir Starmer's failure to support EU single market access, saying his backing for a hard Brexit meant the sum total of his economic offer amounts to further decline in broken Brexit Britain. In recent weeks, senior Labour figures, including London Mayor Sadiq Khan and potential Welsh First Minister Jeremy Miles, have stated their support for a return to the EU single market. Excuse me. Heading into the general election, the SNP Westminster leader said it was clear that only the SNP are advocating for Scotland to rejoin the EU and single market. Stephen Flynn MP commented, the return of the restored Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive again raises a very significant question across these islands. Because, of course, the restored government in Northern Ireland will be operating with full economic benefits of access to the European single market. He continued, the very real and very legitimate question is why 12 miles across the Irish Sea, businesses in Scotland are being denied the same deal and denied the same benefits. Northern Ireland voted to stay. Northern Ireland voted to stay within the European Union and is getting its wishes. However, Scotland voted overwhelmingly to reject Brexit. I haven't had one of these for a while. However, Scotland voted overwhelmingly to reject Brexit, but we are living with its economic damage every single day. Ahead of the general election this year, that is a question businesses across Scotland will be demanding an answer to, and it's clear the SNP is the only party prepared to stand up for Scotland and stand up for the right of those Scottish businesses to have full access to the European single market. It is clearer than ever before that the SNP is the only party that is standing up for Scotland's values, unequivocally advocating for Scotland to rejoin the EU and single market, so that we may once again reap the many benefits of EU membership. Maureen, Stephen Flynn put the same thing back in 2023, when at Prime Minister's questions, he asked Rishi Sunak, he said the Prime Minister said that EU single market access was special, exciting and attractive. So why is he denying it to the rest of us? I'd like to ask you the same question, Maureen, and forgive me, my coughing fit here.
Yeah, that's yeah. You have to have some more water, I think, Brian, while I'm speaking. But yes, following on from what we've just been talking about, the restoration of government in Northern Ireland, it'll be interesting to see how quickly they can make a difference and what difference access to the single market will make. If we see businesses coming to the UK, locating in Northern Ireland as a result of their access to the single market, then I think there will be outrage among businesses in Scotland. And remember, prior to Brexit, Scotland was attracting more than its fair share of inward investment. It was third after London and the southeast. So if there is a move to Northern Ireland as opposed to Scotland, then I think there will be outrage among businesses in Scotland and the business community in Scotland if we're missing out on inward investment and other things. Whether the same outrage will happen in England, I'm not so sure. And it certainly will, both Tories and Labour will try and damp it down as an issue at the general election because they're both on the same page, i.e. not wanting any to upset the apple cart of Brexit Britain, although it is increasingly seen as broken Brexit Britain now. So, I hope that, as I say, Northern Ireland can get up and running in all the things it has to do quickly. But the fact that Scotland is denied access to the single market when we voted to stay in the European Union is an absolute disgrace. It shows that Westminster is denying democracy to Scotland, and the only way back, in my view, is through an independent Scotland, because, as I say, Keir Starmer is not going to upset any apple carts in relation to any moves, I don't think, back into the EU, because he is desperate to regain these red wall seats and other parts of England that voted for Brexit, even though there does seem in the polls to be a move, even in England, that Brexit was a mistake. But whether enough people in England would advocate for rejoining the EU, I kind of doubt at the moment.
I mean, the SNP have been saying this for years, haven't they? That if Northern Ireland can get that deal, then why can't Scotland? Do you think is it going to add grist to the SNP's mill if now Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, and the First Minister in Wales, potential next First Minister, if they're starting to waken up to that, and they're all shouting it at Westminster, is that going to mean it's more likely to come about?
Well, I don't think under this Tory government that's in its dying days, but it'll be interesting to see how Keir Starmer reacts to that coming from a Labour London mayor, and obviously Labour in Wales. Yeah, I mean, we don't know, do we? But it'll be very interesting to see what happens and what pressure is put on Starmer to try and do something to open up the European markets to British companies. And certainly Scotland deserves to be at the forefront of that queue, because Scots didn't vote to come out of the EU in the first place.
Yeah, that was talked about again on the Full Scottish as well, and I would direct viewers to have a look at that if you'd like to hear more about that. So the next item is the retirement age will have to rise to 71 for middle-aged workers across the UK, according to research into the impact of growing life expectancy and falling birth rates on the state pension. The UK pension age of 66 is set to rise to 67 between May 2026 and March 2028. From 2044, it is expected to rise to 68, but the research suggests that this is not enough and that anyone born after April 1970 may have to work until they are 71 before claiming their pension. This age limit may need to be set even higher, say experts, thanks to the high rate of workers exiting the workforce before they reach state pension age, predominantly due to preventable ill health. Les Mayhew, Associate Head of Global Research at the International Longevity Centre and author of the report State Pension Age and Demographic Change, said, in the UK, state pension age would need to be 70 or 71 compared with 66 now to maintain the status quo of the number of workers per state pensioner. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, pensioner benefits will cost the UK government £136 billion in 2023-24, of which £124 billion will be spent on state pensions. Rising pension age Rising pension age has had a greater effect on lower paid workers and the poorest in society, while higher earners can afford to retire earlier, often while still in their 50s. The WASPy women are still campaigning for justice over lost pension entitlements when pension age increased previously. Forgive me, Maureen, just a little lingering trace of that coughing fit there. Maureen, so I'm 60 coming up for 61, and so it looks like I'm probably going to have to work until I'm 67. I'm going to be just behind the curve on this. And this comes, we all know that there's no longer a pension pot into which everybody pays, and then your pension gets sort of doled out to you when you retire. But I'm more interested in the WASPy women. These are women against state pension inequality. And it was in 1995 when the increased age of state pension for women was raised from 60 to 65 so that it would equalise with men. That meant that a lot of women would have to wait another 6 years longer for their pension, and it affected their retirement plans. And this is only a report. I mean, it's not the government saying that they're definitely going to do it. But if they do, how is this going to affect everybody's, especially WASPy women's pension plans?
Well, I think it's an outrageous suggestion. And if this is the only way that is being suggested in dealing with old age, then it's just quite ridiculous. I mean, currently you have to pay 35 years contributions into the national insurance pot. And I realise there's not a pot of money that it's paid out of current government income. But as you've alluded to, Brian, it affects the poorest the worst. I mean, we've got some people like construction workers, for example, leaving school at 16 probably and working till 71. That's ridiculous. I mean, in Scotland already, in the west of Scotland, for example, people are not reaching that age, and yet you're paying in this money and not getting anything back for it. Are they going to start, giving widows and families, for example, that pension pot that people are entitled to if they don't make pension age? It's just ridiculous, and it's also very discriminatory. Again, as you've alluded to, Brian, against women. Women often don't have as many contributions as men because of taking time off work to look after families, which women still in the majority do. And the outrageous treatment of the WASPy women has never been resolved, although there has been some sort of talk about it, but it's not yet been resolved. It would be a good idea if Jeremy Hunt used a budget to right the wrong there instead of giving tax cuts. So I think that the whole way that pensions are thought of, that you have to reach a certain age rather than have a certain amount of time in the workplace, is something that has to be looked at. And you can never get an actuaries to say how that it could work differently, but I'm sure it could.
Thank you, Maureen. Time is against us. I mean, I had a five. I had a. I've got a different question that I'd like to ask Maureen, if you don't mind. And now I've lost my train of thought. I've I I had 5 minutes contingency, which I used up a long time ago today already, Maureen. But do you think, is this maybe another reason to bring back migrant workers and allow asylum seekers to work and contribute to the state, which obviously, because of Westminster's policies at the moment, we're not able to do?
Well, I think there are radical things that we could do if we had a larger working age population, which was something that was happening in Scotland before Brexit. We did have an increase in workers, but now, as a result of Brexit, many people from Europe have gone back to their own countries. And, you know, as we know, asylum seekers could be working if the law was changed. Migrant workers could be welcomed, which they're not at the moment. So there are lots of things that we could do to increase the number of people in the working age population, thereby increasing the tax take. But nobody, neither of the major parties in Westminster, seem to be willing to take on these things. And that's what I was talking about with Starmer being such a coward, really, in not be willing to talk about these things. But it's these radical changes that need to be made. I mean, people work far too long hours, in my opinion. Could we be going, if we had a larger working age population, could we be going to a 4-day week, which might should drastically increase productivity, for example, which we know is historically low in this country. And, since COVID, life expectancy has gone down rather than up. And that should be taken into account too. And we still haven't tackled the problems of ill health within Scotland to any large extent, and these are things that are stubborn to try and change, but must be changed if we are going to start talking about raising the pension age.
Yes, and before we move on, the voice in our ear is just telling us that life expectancy is going up in England, whereas it's falling in Scotland. And the reason that's important in this story is, of course, because it means that more and more people are going to die before they're able to claim their state pension. But time really is against us. So the next item is Labour is planning only limited reforms of social care and the House of Lords and a smaller green investment plan as part of their stripped-down general election manifesto, as it seeks to target its policies at Tory voters in English constituencies. Shadow Cabinet ministers are working to an 8th of February deadline to come up with policy submissions for the Labour manifesto, as Keir Starmer's party prepares for an election that, according to opinion polls, looks likely to return it to government for the first time since 2010. A committee of shadow ministers and officials will then assess which commitments will require legislation in a King's speech that could be delivered within weeks of entering office. The party intends to have both documents ready by mid-March in case Rishi Sunak calls an early spring poll. As well as backing away from its £28 billion a year commitment on green investment, Labour will not seek to legislate on the creation of a new national care service, and despite Keir Starmer's previous promises to abolish the Lords in a first term, it is expected to commit only to abolishing the remaining 91 hereditary peers. Commenting, SNP Deputy Leader at Westminster, Mary Black, said, "The Labour Party has been promising significant reform of the House of Lords for the best part of a century, yet here we are in 2024 with a bloated, archaic institution rammed full of unelected cronies, surpassed in size only by the Chinese National Congress." She went on to say nobody in Scotland will be shocked by news that Labour has dumped plans to abolish the Lords, with all the main UK parties working to keep their pals in Westminster in highly paid jobs for life. But it is an indictment of Sir Keir Starmer's leadership that he is willing to throw yet another key promise to voters on the bonfire in his bid for power. At the expense of democracy, Labour chiefs are boasting the move will help shield the party's manifesto from Tory attacks. "Let me tell you," Mary Black said, "if you've penned a manifesto that even the Tories can't attack, then you've written a Tory manifesto." She went on to say it is clear the closer Starmer gets to number 10, the further he gets from his principles and promises. Excuse me. So, to save time, Maureen, I'm just going to ask, do you agree with Mary Black?
Yes, absolutely. I think I said earlier that, well, she put it much better, that he's just written a Tory manifesto. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see how voters in England react to that, because will they be willing to plump for more of the same, but just change to Keir Starmer? And we know that he's not as popular as the Labour Party as a whole. So, when we do get to a general election campaign, it will be interesting to see how voters, especially in those red wall seats that the Tory party took the last time, how they will vote this time. And I suspect the psephologists and the commentators will be focusing on these seats during the general election. We know that most of the activity takes place in these marginal seats. So, it'll be interesting to see. But Mary Black has put it better than I think I could.
So it begs the question, what is Labour for? And what do you think, what would you say to people that live in Scotland that are maybe thinking about voting Labour at the next general election?
Well, I think increasingly it's been shown in social media, perhaps in particular, that England decides what government Scotland is going to get. It's pretty irrelevant how Scotland votes, and the idea that Labour needs votes from Scotland to win is spurious, to say the least. And I think Hamza has been pointing out that if Labour are going to more or less be the same as the Tories and follow Tory ideas and things that they've done over the past 5 years, then why on earth would you vote Labour? And it's important that there's a large contingent of SNP members in Westminster in order to rein back some of the Tory policies that Labour are going to have said that they're going to continue with.
Thank you, Maureen. So the next item is the SNP has said it will demand any incoming Labour government takes action on poverty, following a challenge by a leading charity, calling on Sir Keir Starmer to scrap the two-child cap and increase universal credit payments. Chris Burt, director of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation in Scotland, told the Daily Record today that improving the welfare system will be a big test for Labour and that they need to show action. The challenge comes after Sir Keir ruled out scrapping the two-child cap and bedroom tax, which have been pushing people into poverty. Commenting, SNP social justice spokesperson David Linden MP said, "The SNP will continue to press the Tories to reverse their cruel welfare cuts ahead of the UK budget, and we will demand the next Labour Party government takes action on poverty. It's shameful that Keir Starmer supports lifting the cap on bankers' bonuses, but wants to impose a cap on child benefits, pushing thousands of children in Scotland into poverty. It shows that why it's vital there's a strong team of SNP MPs elected at the general election to stand up for Scotland's values, drag Starmer to the left and demand action to reduce poverty. The SNP government has led the way on tackling poverty through progressive policies like the Scottish Child Payment. But for every step we take forward, Westminster is dragging Scotland back by imposing cuts to family incomes. So, Maureen, if Labour do impose this cap on child benefits, it's going to lessen the effectiveness of the Scottish Government's child payment, isn't it? Do you think it would just reduce that Scottish child payment just to pure mitigation, a word that we hear again and again?
Yes, I mean, we've talked on this programme a lot about how so much of the Scottish budget is taken in mitigating the cruel policies of Westminster, and the fact that Keir Starmer is not prepared to do these two things, scrap the two-child cap and other things, is really shows you, why would you bother changing? And we could do so much more in Scotland if we weren't mitigating these worst measures. And surely a Labour government should be coming in and trying to reduce the gap in wealth and income. And that doesn't seem to be happening. I mean, are they going to make moves to increase the wages so that we get to nearer £15 an hour, which is thought to be what people need to live on? I mean, it's ridiculous in this day and age that we're subsidising businesses through child credits and things, because people are not prepared to pay a decent. Businesses are not prepared to pay a decent wage. I mean, people are working, 3 jobs and still having to apply for child benefit and child payments and things. It's absolutely ridiculous. And surely you would think that an incoming government or a party that wants to win would be, highlighting these things and be prepared to say we're going to do things differently. But clearly they're not. And I think that this is where people will see the benefits of still voting SNP rather than shifting to vote Labour.
Thank you, Maureen. Forgive me, the Voice Mayor, were you just suggesting? Okay, so moving on to the next item. Forgive me, viewers. So the International Development Minister, Christina McKelvey, has pledged £500,000 to help contain a deadly cholera outbreak in Zambia. The funding comes in response to an emergency appeal from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, the IFRC, for funding to support measures including contact tracing, vaccination and the supply of safe drinking water. As of the 27th of January, 14,900 confirmed cases and 560 deaths have been recorded as a result of the outbreak, with all 10 of Zambia's provinces reporting cases. The IFRC reports this rapid escalation has put a strain on local health services, and schools throughout the country have been closed in an attempt to stop further spread of the disease. International Development Minister Christina McKelvey said, "The next few weeks will be crucial to prevent this severe and rapidly growing cholera epidemic from escalating further, particularly ahead of Zambia's rainy season, as a majority of vulnerable communities have no access to clean water and sanitation facilities, which are essential to prevent the spread of cholera." She went on to say, "This funding reflects the Scottish Government's ongoing commitment to ensure Scotland fulfils its role as a good global citizen through international development and humanitarian work, as well as our long-standing partnership with Zambia." So, Maureen, this seems as another one of those stories that we don't really hear very much about in the headlines. But my question for you is, it's not really a huge amount of money that the Scottish Government's able to spare in global or governmental terms, but it's a huge amount of money to people that are described as working people in previous items during a cost of living crisis. So, what would you say to folk that say that charity should begin at home and that we should be fixing things here at Scotland when they hear this news about Scottish aid going to Zambia?
Well, since the SNP came into power in 2007, and it's been in SNP manifestos for as long as I can remember, that an independent Scotland would meet the recommendation that a government spends, I think is it 0.7% or some of its GDP on, on its international commitments. And when it came into power in 2007, the SNP government enacted that, and it's been in our manifestos ever since. And it's brought huge benefits to the countries that we support. I particularly know the benefits that it has brought to Malawi, having visited there several times. So um, we concentrate our aid on a few countries, and Zambia is one of them. And if we can't come to Zambia's aid when it's experiencing something like a huge cholera outbreak, then when can we? And it does, reiterate that Winnie Ewing's famous phrase, Scotland, stop the world, Scotland wants to get on, rather than be uh, on the edges and on the outskirts. And it does show that Scotland wants to be part of the global citizenship rather than just a narrow nationalist that so many people will accuse us of. So this is a very good news story. And just remember that, countries like those in Africa are going to, become consumers, are bigger consumers than they are now. And if we want to sell our products to up and coming countries, then we've got to show that we, help them in their times of need.
And what about the point made in the item that this is an example of Scotland taking its place as on the world stage, helping internationally? Is that equally valid, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Because so many of our young people, whether they're studying medicine or other things, want to make a contribution um, worldwide. If they're on a gap year or, as I say, on an exchange or whatever, want to help. And these are ways that we can. Often this money is accompanied by people going out to show how they can be used. In this case, obviously medics, but we've had um, money from the Scottish Government going to help with the installation of water, as we've said before, and Strathclyde University leads on that for Scotland. So there are many ways in which people want to make a contribution, whether it is through, as I say, helping with this aid, because a lot of the aid, all of the aid from Scotland goes to NGOs rather than into the government coffers in the countries, because whether that gets to its ordinary citizens is sometimes debatable. So we know we track how the money is used, and remember that the UK government has started using international aid for all sorts of things which aren't what we would expect international aid to be used for. Um, that this is Scotland, as I say, being a global citizen, definitely.
Thank you, Maureen. Well, that's us out of time. But before I go, just thank you again for giving up a huge chunk of your Monday evening. Really appreciate it.
No
So
problem. Enjoyed it.
no, thank you, and thank you for your patience with me as well, Maureen. That's it for this evening. But before I go, Let me just remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will, always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We're still £1,500 short of our £10,000 target. Although the pressure has been eased, we still need to raise that £1,500 to pay our bills immediately, so that we can then focus on securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. Just once again, thank you to Maureen Watt for joining me this evening. But goodbye, and thank you for watching.